Let's get into it. Sold Not For Sale podcast. Coach Colin here in the makeshift studio in Memphis right now. JD Vance, Joe Rogan. JD Vance drops a bombshell about what's going on with Kamala Harris's Justice Department and what they are doing to a person named Glenn Youngkin, who is trying to purge his voter rolls of non-citizens. This is absolutely crazy. I'm going to show you that at the end. I'm going to show you the actual case. I'm going to show you the Justice Department's response to why they're doing this. Then I'm going to show you Glenn Youngkin actually talking about why he feels he needs to do this, because you can't have non-citizens on your voter registry. And then I'm going to show you what the Supreme Court actually ruled. But we're going to start off with Joe Rogan, of course. Let's go.
Can't do anything about it.
Well, you see this in some communities where, because they're small towns and because rapid migrant influx can happen very quickly, where the town population has been doubled. Okay, so you don't even have to assume people are criminals. What does it do to the local public school when all of a sudden 1,000 newcomers show up that don't even speak English? Right? What does it do to the hospital system when you now have thousands of people in a small healthcare system that are showing up to get emergency services because they don't have access otherwise to a doctor, and now the American citizens have to wait in line for 7 hours to get to see a doctor because we've overwhelmed the local hospital system? What does it do to housing prices? We've seen this in a number of communities, including those that I represent in Ohio. When you bring in thousands upon thousands of people, you cannot build enough houses quickly enough to accommodate that, so the cost of housing becomes unaffordable for American citizens. It is the craziest thing that we've seen in this country, that you don't even allow people to talk about the effects of mass migration anymore. Right. And that's why I think it's one of the reasons why Donald Trump is going to be elected president, or at least should be elected president, because he's one of the few guys who's saying, you know what, no, we're going to talk about this problem. Yes, some immigrants are good. Some immigrants are not good, and that is an obvious insight to anybody who knows human nature.
What do you think is the goal behind allowing this to take place? Now, first of all, one of the things that Kamala Harris has said was that there was a bill that could have fixed the border problem, but that Donald Trump did not want it to take place because he wanted to keep this as a political talking point.
Totally dishonest. Totally dishonest.
What was the bill?
Okay, here was the bill. What happened is, okay, let me talk about what the bill does, first of all. Okay. Number one is it sets a maximum cap on the number of illegal immigrants that we can have before the border shuts down. That maximum cap is 2 million illegal aliens per year. It's like 1.85 million, to be more precise. That's number one it did. Number two, it codified what's called catch and release, where a person comes into our country, they're an illegal immigrant, but they say, no, I'm not an illegal immigrant, I'm an asylum seeker. And so their claim for asylum gets adjudicated, but because there's a backlog, because we have so many, their claim isn't going to be adjudicated for 15 years. So rather than having that person wait in Mexico, we give them a work permit, and we give them legal status, and we let them come into the United States of America. That's called catch and release. Donald Trump's policy was, you have to wait in Mexico. We're not going to catch you and then release you into the country for 15 years. It codified that. In other words, even if Donald Trump became president, and this is why he really hated it, is that he would not be able to undo catch and release if he won the election. It would be codified into American law. Third thing that it did, nothing on the border wall, nothing on an immigration system called parole, which is supposed to be a case-by-case. You grant parole to people who are fleeing tyranny, but Harris has used parole to the tune of millions upon millions, mass parole, whole categories of country. So it wasn't a border security bill, it was an amnesty bill. Now, in addition to what I just said, it also gave some table scraps to Border Patrol. And that is what allows them to hinge onto that one thing and to say it's a border security bill. No. It was a mass amnesty bill. It would have made the border problem 10 times worse, and that's why they ultimately pushed it, and that's why Republicans fought against it. By the way, like 6 Democrats voted against that piece of legislation because they thought it was kind of a disaster. So it was not a bipartisan border bill. And in fact, it was much more bipartisan, the opposition to the legislation. But it has allowed Kamala Harris to go around and dishonestly claim that she cares about the southern border, even though when she came into office, they bragged about undoing all of Donald Trump's successful border policies. They did exactly that. And then we had the massive migrant invasion that we've seen over the last 3 years.
And I think it was good on you in the debate with Tim Walz when they fact-checked you. They tried to check you and say that this has always been in place, and you stepped up and said, no. This app is new, and this app was specifically used for shipping.
Yes.
And now they're using it to schedule people to illegally come into the country. Here's the question.
Sure.
Why? Why is this happening? What do you think? I mean, obviously speculation a little bit, but what do you think the motivation of allowing this to take place, and the disproportionate number of people that have moved to swing states, which is also like a little suspicious?
So depends on how many tinfoil hats do you have in this room?
I got a lot, dude. I got a wardrobe.
We can get real serious about this real quick, or pretty crazy very quickly. Look, I think what is obvious is, and I've seen this in the halls of Congress, I've seen it very explicitly. You talk about lobbying, and we obviously talked about in the context of other industries. There is a massive corporate lobby for cheap labor in the United States of America. And that is, I think, the main thing that's going on. Think about this. If you've got millions of illegal aliens, okay, let me tell you a story. In 2017, 2018, when I was in the private sector, I was at a business conference dinner, and I was seated next to the CEO of one of the largest hotel chains in America. This is, I think, probably 2018. And the guy is going on and on about how much he hates Donald Trump. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like, why do you hate Donald Trump so much? Because again, I was sort of a Trump skeptic in 2015, and at this point, I was kind of starting to really get on the Trump train. And he said, well, the reason I hate Donald Trump, he says, is because Donald Trump's border policies have cut down the number of illegal immigrants. And because I can't pay illegal immigrants under the table anymore, I have to pay American workers, and they want much higher wages. And I was like, this guy just admitted it. I was like, holy shit, this guy just admitted it.
That's a crime.
That is like straight up monopoly man evil shit that this guy admitted to. And I was like, my wife, who's very apolitical, she was actually at the dinner with me, and she's like, come again? You just said you don't want Americans to get decent wages. Like, that is the best argument for Donald Trump's immigration policy, is that American workers are getting higher wages, and this is why this corporate CEO hates it. So whatever the industry is, you've got a lot of people who want cheap labor, and they don't want to pay American workers higher wages. That's a big part of it. I do think there's also a power dynamic to it. In particular, I think Kamala Harris and the Democrats, they want to give these millions upon millions of illegal aliens the right to vote. They want to legalize them. They want to make it easier for them to participate in our elections. And that means fundamentally the end of American democracy. Because you're talking about 25 million people here. If Kamala Harris gives 10 million of those people legal status and allows them to vote in American elections, then, say 70-30, they go Democrat, Republicans will never win a national election in this country in my lifetime.
And the only way to get them on your side would be the Republicans offer the same services and maybe even be more generous in letting illegals in.
Exactly.
I mean, you would have to literally beat them at their own game. Yeah, I'm going to give you a free house.
Yeah, no, I mean, no, lifetime's probably overstating it, but it would take 30 years for the Republicans to get to a point where we could even compete with these newcomers. But again, it will have degraded the voting power of the people who have the legal right to be here.
And it would essentially turn these states blue forever. The same way they've done California.
Exactly. And we saw this. And look, I'm like a Reagan guy, right? I'm a conservative Republican. But Reagan screwed up a lot. He screwed up mental health in this country. People don't talk nearly enough about that.
The amnesty thing he really screwed up.
The amnesty thing he really screwed up.
Yeah.
And people always say, well, Ronald Reagan, when critics of Donald Trump will say, well, look at how Reagan talked about immigration. Because of what Ronald Reagan did, if the 1986 amnesty, California is now effectively a permanently blue state.
Except when Arnold won.
But Arnold ran as a super moderate Republican. He was a major celebrity, right? He was at the height of his celebrity power, and he still won barely, even though California had been mismanaged. California is a one-party state because of Ronald Reagan's amnesty.
And that's the fear, is that the entire country could become one party.
The entire country becomes that. Now, it also...
Man, that is a real thing. Elon Musk brought that up while he was talking to Tucker Carlson, I believe, as well. He was saying the exact same thing. The reason I paused it, I'm going to jump over to another clip of JD Vance talking about this. I hate having to look at my notes on the phone here, but check this out. What he's about to say is something I did not know was happening, and it all points to one real outcome of why all of this is happening. Check this out.
Want people to be able to vote that maybe shouldn't be voting. And then there's all these lawsuits where they're counting votes that they know to be illegitimate. Well, they're saying that there's a certain amount of people that are in the system that they want to keep in there.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. So you're saying you want people that shouldn't be allowed to vote.
No. They say that they don't want illegal aliens or illegal voters to vote. The Harris administration right now is litigating a lawsuit against the governor of Virginia because the governor of Virginia, using a state law, kicked about 1,500 people, or maybe it was 6,500, but it was some number of people off the Virginia voter rolls because they checked a box that said they were non-citizen. Well, if you're non-citizen, you can't be on the voter rolls. So he kicked all of the non-citizens off the voter rolls. Harris is suing Glenn Youngkin. The Department of Justice under Kamala Harris is suing him to ensure that those voters go back on the voter rolls.
There's no argument that makes any sense.
There's no argument for this other than you want to facilitate cheating.
But the fact that the left has no problem with this because they just want to win is insane.
But who's going to hold their feet to the fire? Who's going to tell the honest truth? The American media has barely even covered the fact that in the middle of a very consequential presidential election, Kamala Harris's Department of Justice is suing to keep illegal voters on the voter rolls. It's crazy.
It's wild. So it's like for Trump to win, he has to win by an enormous margin. He has to overcome a lot of this shenanigans.
Well, as President Trump says, we want to make it too big to rig. I encourage all of your listeners, whether you agree with us on all the issues or not, if you agree with censorship, then vote Kamala Harris. And if you think Americans should be able to say what they want to say, then get out there and vote. Vote early, vote by mail. Like, that's obviously part of the reason why I'm here, is I want to get people out there to vote, because I do think that we need to overwhelm the system with so many voters that we ensure that we get the representative government that we actually deserve as a country. And that's not going to happen unless people get out there and vote.
Man, I had no idea that was happening. I knew about Texas purging their voter registry, and I didn't hear about any real pushback except from people in their own states. I believe it was Robertson County. They were pushing back because they're like, we have this under control. And then later on, or before that, two of the people who were involved in the counting were actually under criminal charges for saying that there were no more ballots when there were. It's just a bunch of craziness, but I did not know that this was happening. It is a real thing that's going on. DOJ sues Virginia for allegedly purging non-citizens from the voter rolls too close to the election. Now I'm going to show you what their explanation is as to why they're doing this to Virginia. But I think we all know what's really going on. But let's hear them out anyway.
Federal court documents reveal U.S. district attorneys believe Virginia elections officials are violating the National Voter Registration Act, specifically an argument that the state is not in compliance with what is known as the quiet period provision.
So the DOJ is not saying to Virginia, you can't maintain your voter rolls properly. You can't remove ineligible voters.
Rebecca Green, an election law professor at William & Mary University, describes it like a buffer window. This is a deadline that certain voter roll maintenance must stop before Election Day so that eligible voters aren't mistakenly removed from casting their ballot.
There's a potential that a voter wouldn't have enough time to remedy the mistake. So is that what that is?
That's exactly right. Not having enough time to, fix the problem, or not even being aware of the problem and showing up on Election Day and being turned away.
Although he is not a listed defendant in the case, this stems from an executive order by Governor Glenn Youngkin, which removes citizens from a voter roll if they don't verify their information through the DMV. And this summer, the DOJ argues more than 40 people in Prince William County are believed to have been mistakenly removed as eligible voters because of a process like this.
I gotta say, I don't buy it. I don't buy that they're looking out for those 40 people. I gotta be honest with you. I'm willing to hear it out. It does make sense if you take somebody off the registry that should be on there. They're a citizen of the United States of America. Okay, I get it, but I don't think that's their intention. I think that's their excuse. I'm going to be honest. But let's hear this gentleman out, Glenn Youngkin. He actually speaks on this situation, then we'll hear the verdict after.
And it requires us to use DMV data where people self-identify as non-citizens to then go through a process. That bill was signed in 2006, and it requires us to use DMV data where people self-identify as non-citizens to then go through a process of removing them from the voter rolls if they're on the voter rolls. And guess what? That's exactly what we've been doing. It's been happening for 18 years. Democrat governors, even Terry McAuliffe and Ralph Northam, used this process all the way up through into October. And that's exactly what we're doing in Virginia today, is someone walks into the DMV, they identify themselves as a non-citizen, somehow or another, either by accident or by purpose, they register to vote, they're on the voter roll. we go through a process of notifying the registrar that they need to be told that if they cannot affirm their citizenship in 14 days, they're taken off the voter roll. And this is the process that the Department of Justice, 25 days before a presidential election, turns around and says, you must stop doing this. And that is unbelievable to me. I mean, here I am, a governor, mandated, and oh, by the way, proud to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and by law to make sure that we have clean voter rolls. And the Department of Justice shows up 25 days before a presidential election and says, stop doing that. To me, this is unprecedented. And I think it represents a Department of Justice that is trying to achieve something other than fair and free elections. And I have to say, my job as governor is to make sure that the election in Virginia will be fair, will be accurate, and will be safe. And that's exactly what I am doing, and I will continue to do it because the Department of Justice is wrong here.
Solid. I liked everything he just had to say. And also he just revealed that there is a time period where you are able to reveal that you are a citizen. You do have this grace period to prove it, so you don't get taken off the registry. Now, the thing is, if there is those 40 people, perhaps they didn't make that clear in time. So that happens, but it's not like what this video here that I found where they were talking about it, they were making it seem, this lady here was making it seem as though they're just going at it all willy-nilly. They're just chopping through and just throwing people off, and it's indiscriminate, and they're not checking anything. That's not the facts. There's actually a system in place. You find people who are non-citizens. If somehow there's a mistake, or maybe you became a citizen, maybe something along those lines happened, you have a time period to prove that. So the fact that they still want it stopped, I don't know, man. Doesn't seem on the up and up to me, but here's what the Supreme Court had to say about it.
I'm going to go now, just ruling that Virginia will be allowed to resume its purge of voter registrations. Remember, the governor said that there were some 1,600 who were admitted non-citizens. David Spunce live with that in D.C. What's the word, David? Hello.
Well, this is significant, and this is a controversial issue in Virginia. And while it's dealing with only 1,600 voters or so, it's something that could have national implications as we are now less than a week away. So Governor Glenn Youngkin signed an executive order back in August. The Department of Justice sued Youngkin, saying that he can't toy with executive orders and taking people off voter rolls within 90 days of an election. It violates federal law. Governor Youngkin says that some 1,600 people did not present their citizenship status. They are non-citizens of the United States, and they should not be able to vote. The Justice Department said some of them did not properly fill out a DMV form. They skipped over a box, or some became citizens later, resulting in actual U.S. citizens being removed from the rolls in error. So the Supreme Court ruling on that today. These are the states right now where legal challenges currently exist. Many are battleground states. In North Carolina, a federal appeals court ruled the state Republican Party's effort to question some 225,000 ballots must stay in federal court, not move to state court. That's a temporary win for Democrats there. In Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court expected to rule about provisional ballots there. Now, while the justices are busy, the court did cross off one case, or if you will, two cases yesterday. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s name will remain on the ballot in Michigan and Wisconsin, though he wanted it taken off after endorsing former President Trump. Even though he's no longer a candidate, people can still vote for him in those cases. The High Court also involved in several pre-election cases. Both campaigns have said they've recruited Bill and Dana thousands of lawyers across the country, some on a volunteer basis for pre- and post-election fights. One concern, getting the pace of the results in. In many states, if you cast a ballot early, it can be counted early, but not in 6 states, including the swing state of Pennsylvania, where everyone's watching. Officials there cannot even open the ballots until Election Day, so the results may not be known in Pennsylvania for days. State officials in Pennsylvania say nothing nefarious about that. Back to you.
So we'll try.
Of course, nothing nefarious about that. They're saying it's going to take them like 13 days. So interesting number, interesting amount of time. It's almost 2 weeks. Used to happen over one day. I remember when Trump got elected, I remember me and the wife, she was my girlfriend back then. We fell asleep. I think we woke up around 12:30, 1:30. Results were in. I don't know what happened. Did people slow down? What happened? I don't know. It's weird. It's very weird. Out of nowhere. After Trump won, it seems like they realized, oh, we're not going to do it that fast again. That's what it seemed like to me. I don't know. It's gotten longer and longer ever since the one outsider actually took office. But just going through everything that was said just now, the Republicans never win again if these illegal non-citizens, we'll call them illegal immigrants, non-citizens, if they actually stay on these voter registries and actually get to vote, it could result in Republicans never winning again in his lifetime, which would be my lifetime as well, because we're the same age. And they would have to do the same as the left, which is absolutely insane. They would have to start buying houses and drilling the economy into the ground. It would be terrible. They would have to support climate change. They would have to just become the left. It would just be two left-wing parties, and that would be no good. And then going to what JD Vance had to say about Biden's border bill. I keep on talking about this, and I'm so glad that he touched on it. It's just an expedited process for people who are illegally crossing. You would still end up in one presidential term, 8 million people crossing illegally into the country, not having to remain in Mexico. It's so silly. Now, one thing that JD didn't mention, which, just to be fair, they did want more judges who could process these cases so the people wouldn't be sitting there for 15 years. In theory, they would get these cases sorted out a lot quicker. The thing is that you're letting the people into the country if they know that they're not really an asylum seeker. If they know they don't have a strong case, they're not going to come back, and they're not going to have to. If they work under the table for lower wages, just like he talked about in that clip, they never have to show up. Sure, someone will be looking for them, but he told you his name was Jose Rodriguez, and you didn't take any identification because he didn't have to show you anything. And now he probably has another name that he's going under, and how are you going to find him? Times that by millions of people. You know what I mean? Not everybody who crosses over is good. Let's say it's half and half to be fair. Let's just say, and it's been 10 million? So 5 million people decide to do it that way that I just said. 5 million people are honest and decent and come in for their... It's still no good. It's still just a terrible process. So I keep talking about that bill and how terrible it was. I did a few videos on it. You can look them up. But JD Vance dropping that bomb. I didn't know that was what was going on right now. Suing Virginia because Virginia is actually taking the election seriously and trying to make sure it's fair. There's no saying that all those people that Virginia's purging from their voter registry, there's no real saying that they're all going to vote for Kamala Harris. Some of them might vote for Trump. Some of them might really like Trump. You have no idea. He's just trying to keep it fair, and he's getting sued for that. And then, not to mention, what happens if she does win? That same Supreme Court that made sure that terrible thing didn't happen to Virginia all of a sudden gets stacked with left-wing people who will be okay with that happening. Chaos. Absolute chaos. But just to sum it up, the last thing that JD Vance said was get out there and vote. Please do. And the one thing I will end with is when JD was talking about, what happens when 1,000 kids come speaking different languages, there is a clip of Tim Walz bragging that in his schools, the kids speak 50 different languages. And in the left-wing virtue signaling mindset, that's a great thing. But if I'm a teacher, that's terrible. I barely know 2 languages, and now I have to learn another 50, hopefully. No, that's actually not a good thing at all. So just a funny little thing I thought I'd add at the end. But back to what JD said, get out there and vote. Make sure you vote. Gather your friends. Make a day of it. Get out and vote. Anyways, guys, like, subscribe, turn on the notifications, helps the channel tremendously, especially now because they don't really like what I'm talking about. And other than that, I'm out.